When I turned 18, the state of California handed me a cardboard box and a bus ticket. What they didn't know was that my grandfather had left me something else entirely. 3 rust-red shipping containers stacked in the middle of nowhere. A strange, lonely tower waiting in a field I'd never seen. What we discovered inside would change everything. If you've ever felt like you've been left with nothing but a past you didn't ask for, hit that subscribe button, because this story is for you. This is about how my sister and I started over. The door to the County Family Services building clicked shut behind me with a sound of finality, a flat metallic thud that echoed the closing of a file cabinet drawer. 18 years, an entire life summarized in reports, case numbers, and now a single cardboard box tucked under my arm. The box wasn't heavy, but it felt like it contained the weight of every temporary home, every slammed door, every hollow "we're just trying to help" that had defined my existence. Inside was the official me, a folded birth certificate, a social security card that looked too clean, and a thin file of school transcripts that showed more addresses than passing grades. Freedom felt less like a sunrise and more like the jarring hum of fluorescent lights in a hallway you're being kicked out of. Across the street, leaning against a bus stop bench, was the only thing that mattered. Maya, my sister. 16 years old, and she had a way of standing that made her look like a warrior trying to seem small. Her arms were crossed, her dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her eyes, our grandfather's eyes, a deep, stormy gray, were fixed on me, scanning for damage. 2 years. That's how much time we had before the system would do the same thing to her that it had just done to me. Spit her out with a box and a bus ticket to nowhere. The thought was a cold knot in my stomach. I was her legal guardian now, in the most technical, terrifying sense of the word. An 18-year-old guardian with $53 in his pocket and a box of government paper. I crossed the street, the worn-out soles of my state-issued boots scuffing on the asphalt. Maya didn't smile when I reached her. She just uncrossed her arms, and her shoulders sagged a fraction of an inch. It was her version of a hug. "You good, Leo?" she asked, her voice low. "You look like you saw a ghost." "Just my own," I said, trying for a bit of humor that fell flat on the smoggy air. The ghost of childhood past. I set the box down on the bench between us. It felt like a monument to our failure, or our parents' failure. It was hard to tell the difference anymore. We were the wreckage they'd left behind, and the state had been the tow truck, dragging us from one impound lot to another. "So, what's the plan?" she asked, her gaze flicking from the box to my face. She was always the practical one. I was the dreamer, the one who stared out of windows. Maya was the one who checked to make sure the windows were locked. "Plan A is to not panic," I said, opening the box. I needed to look like I had a plan, even if I was just making it up as I went along. I sorted through the papers, the flimsy artifacts of a life lived on letterhead. Then my fingers brushed against something that didn't belong. It was heavy, solid, and cold. I pulled it out. A single, old-fashioned skeleton key, the kind you see in movies about haunted mansions. It was made of black iron, ornate and heavy, attached to a simple leather fob. Tucked beneath it was a thick, cream-colored manila envelope. My name was written on the front in a spidery, unfamiliar script. Leo Vargas. "What's that?" Maya asked, leaning in. "I have no idea." The envelope wasn't sealed with glue, but with a formal-looking wax seal, a deep burgundy stamped with a simple, stylized V. I broke the seal with my thumbnail, my heart starting to beat a little faster. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper, thick and expensive feeling. It was a letter, but not a personal one. It was from a law office, Davies, Finch and Associates. To Mr. Leonardo Vargas, I read aloud, my voice suddenly feeling dry. This letter serves as formal notification regarding the estate of your maternal grandfather, Mr. Elias Vargas. Upon the occasion of your 18th birthday, you are to inherit the sole property listed in his final will and testament. The property in question is a 4.7-acre parcel of undeveloped land located at... I trailed off, reading the rural address, a county and a road name I'd never heard of. Enclosed you will find the deed, a property map, and a key to the gate. Please be advised that there are outstanding property taxes amounting to $1,842.56. We recommend contacting our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the liquidation of the asset. I stared at the letter. Maya stared at me. A grandfather. Elias Vargas. I had a vague, dreamlike memory of him, a whisper from before everything fell apart. A tall man with kind, gray eyes and hands that smelled of sawdust and soil. He'd died when I was 6, just before we went into the system. Our mother never talked about him. To us, he was just a name, another ghost. He left us land? Maya's voice was a whisper. We own something? Looks like it, I said, a strange mix of hope and dread coiling in my gut. I pulled the other documents from the envelope, a folded, crinkling map marked with a red X, and a crisp, official-looking deed. And at the bottom, another envelope, smaller and softer than the first. This one just had my name on it, in the same handwriting. It felt personal. I tucked it into my jacket pocket, a secret to save for later. What does liquidation of the asset mean? Maya asked, her brow furrowed. It means sell it, I said. The lawyer's tone was clear. This wasn't a gift, it was a problem. A piece of worthless land with a tax bill attached. They probably expected me to sell it to some developer for a few $1,000, pay them their fee, and walk away with just enough money to be homeless somewhere else. But for a split second, a different thought took hold. Land. 4.7 acres. It wasn't a room in a group home. It wasn't a temporary placement. It was a place. Our place. The bus ticket the county gave me was a one-way to a shelter in a city 50 miles north. I looked at the ticket, then at the deed in my hand. 2 different futures. One was a well-worn path I already knew, a path of crowded rooms and waiting lists. The other was a map to a place I'd never been, marked with a red X. It was a future I couldn't even imagine, but it was ours. Change of plan, I said, looking at Maya. Her gray eyes were wide, waiting. We're not going north. We're going to find this place. But the taxes, Leo, the letter. We'll figure it out, I said, with a confidence I absolutely did not feel. We have $53, a box of papers, and a key. We're practically rich. She didn't laugh, but a tiny corner of her mouth twitched. It was enough. I stood up and dropped the shelter bus ticket into a nearby trash can. It felt like the first real choice I had ever made. We walked to the transit center, and I pushed a wad of our precious cash across the counter to a bored-looking clerk. 2 tickets to Harmony Creek, I said, reading the name of the town nearest the property off the map. The clerk squinted at me. You sure? There's not much out there. It's where we're going, I said. The bus ride was 8 hours of watching the world transform. The concrete sprawl of the city gave way to endless suburbs, which then bled into dry, golden farmland. The farther we went, the emptier the landscape became. The bus got emptier too, until it was just us, an old woman sleeping with her mouth open, and the driver. Maya had her face pressed against the window, watching the oak-studded hills roll by. I watched her. For years, my only job was to be her brother, a fixed point in her chaotic world. Now, I was her guardian. The title felt heavy, like a suit of armor that was too big for me. We spent most of the ride in silence. We were good at silence. It was a language we had learned in houses where shouting was the primary form of communication. Her silence was tense, watchful. Mine was a frantic internal monologue, a loop of doubt and fear. What if the land was a joke, a patch of useless desert? What if the lawyer was right and it was just a burden? I was dragging my sister into the middle of nowhere based on a ghost's promise. Late in the afternoon, the bus wheezed to a stop at a dusty crossroads. A single, faded sign read, "Welcome to Harmony Creek, Pop 412. The town wasn't so much a town as a suggestion of one. There was a gas station with a small, attached general store, a boarded-up diner, and a post office. That was it. The air smelled different here, clean, sharp, with the scent of dry grass and pine. It was so quiet, I could hear the buzz of a fly. The bus pulled away in a cloud of diesel smoke, leaving us standing in a silence that felt vast and intimidating. A few people at the general store glanced at us, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. We were outsiders, clearly and completely. I felt their eyes on our worn clothes, our single shared backpack, the cardboard box I was still carrying. "Now what?" Maya asked, her voice small. I pulled out the map. "The property is about 5 miles down this road," I said, pointing. "Guess we walk." We'd only gone about 100 yards when a rusty blue pickup truck slowed down beside us. An old man with a face like a road map and a stained baseball cap leaned out the window. "You kids look a little lost," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "We're headed down Ridge Road," I said, trying to sound like I knew what I was talking about. He grunted. "That's a long walk with luggage. Where are you headed on Ridge?" I hesitated. I didn't want to announce our business to the first person we met. A piece of land belonged to our grandfather, Elias Vargas. The man's eyebrows shot up. "Elias? You're Elias's grandkids?" His whole demeanor changed. The suspicion in his eyes softened into something like recognition. "Well, I'll be. Get in. I'll give you a lift. Name's Hank." We climbed into the truck. It smelled of oil and old coffee. Maya squeezed in the middle, clutching the backpack. "You knew our grandfather?" I asked as we rumbled down the cracked pavement. "Knew him well," Hank said. "Quiet man. Kept to himself mostly, especially the last few years. Smart as a whip, though. Could build anything. Everyone around here thought he was a little strange, buying that piece of scrub land. Said he was working on some project." He glanced at us. "Heard he passed a while back. Sorry for your loss. He was a good man." The words hung in the air. A good man. It was more than I'd ever heard anyone say about him. It felt like a small seed of hope being planted in the barren soil of my anxiety. After a few miles, Hank turned off the main road onto a dirt track. "This is it," he said, pulling to a stop in front of a high chain-link fence. The gate was secured with a heavy, rusted padlock. Beyond it, the land was a wild tangle of overgrown weeds, coyote brush, and spindly, sun-baked trees. It looked completely abandoned. My heart sank. This was it. This was the inheritance. A patch of dirt behind a fence. "Well, this is you," Hank said, a note of pity in his voice. "You sure you got a place to stay? It's gonna get cold tonight." "We'll be fine," I said, forcing a confidence I didn't feel. "Thank you for the ride." He nodded, still looking concerned. "Store's open till 7 if you need anything." He drove off, leaving us in another cloud of dust and an even deeper silence. For a long moment, we just stood there, staring through the fence. "It's rough," Maya said finally. "It's ours," I replied, trying to convince myself as much as her. I pulled out the heavy iron key. It fit the padlock perfectly. With a groan of protest from the rusty metal, the lock clicked open. I swung the gate wide. The hinges shrieked. It felt like we were opening a book that hadn't been touched in years. We stepped through, and I pulled the gate closed behind us. We were in. We pushed our way through the tall, dry grass. The land sloped gently upwards. It was wild, but as we walked, I started to notice things. Small, almost invisible signs of intention. A line of stones that might have once been a path. A cluster of young fruit trees, struggling but alive. It wasn't just abandoned. It was dormant, waiting. We crested a small rise, and that's when we saw it. My breath caught in my throat. Maya just whispered, "Whoa." In the center of a clearing, stark against the pale blue sky, stood a tower. It wasn't made of stone or wood. It was 3 massive industrial shipping containers, the kind you see on cargo ships or trains, painted a deep, flaking rust red. They were stacked perfectly, one on top of the other, creating a bizarre, 3-story rectangular structure. A narrow black metal staircase was welded to the side, zigzagging its way to the top. It was the strangest and most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It looked like a child's forgotten building blocks, magnified 1,000 times and dropped in the middle of a field. "Is that it?" Maya asked, her voice filled with awe. "Is that our house?" "I don't know what it is," I said, walking towards it slowly. It was both absurd and magnificent. The scale of it was hard to process. Each container was 40 feet long. The whole structure rose 30 feet into the air. It was a fortress, a monument. Hank had said my grandfather was working on a project. This was it. The bottom container had a heavy, windowless steel door cut into its side with a reinforced lock. I tried the same iron key. It didn't fit. Disappointment washed over me. Of course, the key was for the gate. This was just a dead end. We were standing in front of a giant metal box we couldn't even open. "Now what, Leo?" Maya asked, the hope draining from her voice. "We look for another key," I said, my mind racing. He wouldn't leave us a locked door without a key. We searched everywhere, around the base of the containers, under rocks, in the hollow of a nearby oak tree. Nothing. The sun was beginning to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The temperature was dropping. Panic began to prickle at the back of my neck. Hank's words echoed in my head. "It's gonna get cold tonight." Defeated, I sat down on the ground, my back against the cold steel wall of the bottom container. I pulled my jacket tighter around me. My hand brushed against the inside pocket, and I felt the crinkle of the other envelope. The personal one, the one I had saved. My fingers suddenly felt numb. With trembling hands, I pulled it out. "Leo," it said. I carefully tore it open. Inside, there wasn't a letter. There was a single small shiny brass key and a folded piece of paper. The paper contained a short, handwritten note. "Leo, if you're reading this, you made it. I knew you would. Your mother always said you had a good sense of direction. The big key is for the world. This little one is for home. Start at the bottom. The rest is waiting for you. Be brave for your sister. Love, Grandpa Elias." My eyes welled up. This little one is for home. I looked at the small brass key in my palm. It was so simple, so unassuming. I walked to the door and slid the key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, satisfying click. I grabbed the heavy latch handle, put my shoulder into it, and pulled. The door swung open with a deep, resonant groan, revealing the dark, cavernous space within. The air that rolled out was cool and still, smelling of dust, metal, and something else, wood. It was the smell I faintly remembered from my grandfather's hands. Taking a deep breath, I stepped across the threshold, Maya close behind me. The last of the evening light spilled in, illuminating the space. It wasn't empty. It was a workshop. A long, heavy wooden workbench ran the entire length of one wall, covered in neatly organized tools. Saws, drills, sanders, boxes of screws and nails. On the other side were shelves filled with canisters, manuals, and rolled-up blueprints. It was the most organized space I had ever seen. It was a place of purpose, of creation. In the very center of the floor, sitting on a small, clean patch of concrete, was a heavy, dark green metal lockbox, the kind the military uses. It had a sturdy hasp, but no lock. "He was a builder," Maya said softly, running her hand over the smooth surface of the workbench. "He was preparing," I said, my gaze fixed on the lockbox. I knelt down and lifted the heavy lid. Inside, my heart skipped a beat. It was filled to the brim with stacks of envelopes, all identical to the personal one I had just opened. They were tied in bundles with twine, organized by year, and on top of the first bundle was a single, thicker envelope, with a simple instruction written on the front. "Read me first." I lifted it out. It felt impossibly heavy. This was it. This was the rest of the story. I sat down on the cold floor, Maya settling beside me, her shoulder pressing against mine for warmth and support. The light from the open door was fading fast. I pulled the small flashlight from our backpack, clicked it on, and aimed its thin beam at the page. I took a deep breath and began to read my grandfather's words aloud. "My dearest Leo," the letter began, the handwriting the same spidery script, but this time it felt intimate, like a voice speaking directly to me. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are a man. I am sorry I could not be there to see it. I am sorry for so much. I imagine you have 1,000 questions. Why this place? Why these steel boxes? Why did I leave you and your sister to fend for yourselves? I will try to answer them. But first, you must understand that everything I have done, every nail I have driven, and every dollar I have spent, was for you and Maya. This place is not an inheritance. It is an ark." The word hung in the dusty air between us. An ark. "When your mother was young," I continued reading, my voice a little shaky, "she was full of light. But she met your father, and that light began to dim. He was a charming man, but he was involved with dangerous people. Not gangsters from the movies, but worse. Men in suits who bought up land, crushed small businesses, and broke anyone who stood in their way. Your father borrowed money from them, a lot of money. He thought he could outsmart them. He was wrong. My throat was tight. Maya was gripping my arm, her knuckles white. We had never known the details. Our parents were just a story with a tragic ending, a car accident on a rainy night. That's what we were told. There was no accident, Leo, the letter went on, and I had to stop and take a breath before I could continue. They ran your parents off the road. They made it look like a tragedy. They came to me afterwards looking for the money. I told them there was none. I sold my house, the one you barely remember, with the big yard and the porch swing. I gave them most of it, but I told them it was everything. I held a little back. Enough for this. Enough for you. I could feel Maya trembling beside me. The story of our lives was being rewritten in the beam of a tiny flashlight in a steel box in the middle of nowhere. We weren't just orphans. We were survivors of something ugly and intentional. I tried to get custody of you both, he wrote. I fought for a year. But the state saw an old man, a carpenter with no savings and a small apartment, and they saw two traumatized children who needed professional care. They said I wasn't a suitable guardian. They took you, and it broke my heart. But I knew the system. I knew it would chew you up and spit you out. I knew that on your 18th birthday, they would show you the door. And I knew those men, the ones your father owed. They don't forget. They have long memories. A deed in your name for my old house would have been a flag, a target on your back. So I became a ghost. I bought this forgotten piece of land under a company name. I paid cash for these containers, one by one, and I started to build. He went on to explain everything, his words a blueprint for our survival. The bottom container, the workshop, was where I would learn a trade. A man who can build things will never starve, he wrote. It was filled with tools, and he'd left manuals and books on carpentry, welding, and basic engineering. The second container, the one directly above us, was the living space. He had already installed insulation, subflooring, and framed out walls for a small kitchen, a bathroom, and 2 tiny bedrooms. He'd left diagrams showing how to run plumbing from a well he'd dug, and how to hook up a generator and solar panels, all of which was stored in the back of the workshop. The top container, he explained, was the greenhouse. He'd had custom skylights installed. It was designed to grow food year-round. You will be self-sufficient, he wrote. You will be safe. No one will ever be able to control you or take anything from you again. Finally, he wrote about the money. The tax bill is a test, Leo. The company that your father got mixed up with, Omnicorp Developments, they own most of the land around here now. They've been trying to buy this parcel for years. They watch the tax rolls. They see a delinquent property with an out-of-town owner, and they swoop in. They will send you a letter. They will offer you pennies on the dollar. They will try to scare you. Do not sell. Under the floorboards of the workbench, beneath the loose plank in the far left corner, you will find what you need. It's not much, but it's enough to pay the taxes and buy your first supplies. It's clean money from every side job I worked for 5 years. He ended the letter with a final, heart-wrenching plea. This is a hard life I have left you. It is not fair. You should have had a childhood, a home, a family. I tried to give you what I could. This place is all I have to offer. It is a chance. What you build here will be yours, truly yours. Build a good life, Leo. Take care of your sister. Forgive me. When I finished reading, the silence in the container was absolute. The only sound was the shuddering breath I was trying to hold back. I couldn't. A sob broke from my chest, raw and painful. I put my head in my hands and I cried. I cried for the grandfather I never got to know, a man who had loved us so fiercely from a distance. I cried for the parents I barely remembered, not for their loss, but for the mess they had made. I cried for Maya, for the childhood that had been stolen from her. And I cried for myself, for the 18-year-old boy sitting in the dark, holding the weight of a ghost's love and a future that felt both terrifying and sacred. Maya didn't say anything. She just wrapped her arms around me and held on, her own tears soaking the shoulder of my jacket. We stayed like that for a long time, two broken pieces leaning against each other, creating a fragile whole. The grief was a storm, but when it passed, something else remained in its place, a cold, hard clarity, a purpose. After a while, my sobs subsided. I wiped my eyes on my sleeve and took a shaky breath. "The workbench," I said, my voice hoarse. "The far left corner." We crawled over to the end of the long bench. The floorboards were thick, heavy wood. I ran my hands over them, feeling for a seam. There. One plank felt slightly different. I wedged my fingers into the crack and pulled. It came up easily. Beneath it was a hollow space, and nestled inside was a small, tightly sealed metal box. It was heavy. I lifted it out and opened the latches. It was full of cash, neat stacks of 20s, 50s, and 100s wrapped in rubber bands. I didn't count it. I didn't need to. I could see it was thousands of dollars. More money than I had ever seen in my life. Tucked on top was a note. Taxes first, then food, then build. I closed the box, a sense of awe washing over me. He had thought of everything. He had laid out a path for us in the darkness. But walking it was still up to us. I looked at Maya. Her face was streaked with tears in the flashlight's beam, but her eyes, those stormy gray eyes, were clear. They weren't scared anymore. They were resolved. "So we're staying?" she asked. It wasn't a question of doubt. It was a confirmation, a statement of fact. "We're staying," I said. The words felt solid, real. This is our home now. That night, we didn't climb the stairs to the unfinished living space. We laid out our sleeping bags on the floor of the workshop, surrounded by the tools of our new life. The open door let in the cold night air, but for the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't feel cold. I felt a flicker of warmth, a pilot light of hope that had been extinguished for years. Before I fell asleep, I looked out at the sky. It was a deep velvet black, littered with a spray of stars so bright and clear they felt close enough to touch. I had never seen a sky like that. It was the sky my grandfather must have looked at every night as he built this place for us. It was the roof of our new home. The next morning, we woke up with the sun. The world felt new. The first task was simple: exploration. We needed to see the rest of our inheritance. We left the workshop door open to air it out and climbed the metal staircase that snaked up the side of the container tower. It was solid, well built, the welds clean and strong. My grandfather's work. The door to the second level opened with the same type of lock and key. This space was completely different. Sunlight streamed in through several large, framed-out openings that were covered with thick plastic sheeting for protection. This was to be our living space. The air smelled of fresh-cut pine. Just as the letter had promised, the floor was down, the walls were insulated, and the basic framing for the rooms was in place. It was a skeleton, waiting for muscle and skin. On one wall, he had tacked up the blueprints. They were hand-drawn, meticulous. He'd labeled everything. Leo's room, Maya's room, kitchen, bathroom, composting toilet plans here. He'd even sketched in a small bookshelf next to a window seat. He hadn't just built a shelter, he had designed a home, imagining us living inside it. Seeing our names on that blueprint, written in his hand, hit me with another wave of emotion. He had pictured us here. He had held us in his mind for all those years. It made the whole project feel less like a survival bunker and more like a promise. We climbed the final flight of stairs to the top. This door opened into a world of light. The entire roof of the third container had been replaced with thick, angled panes of glass, like a massive greenhouse. The air was warm and humid, even in the cool morning. Long, empty planting beds made of reclaimed wood ran the length of the space, filled with rich, dark soil. A rainwater collection system was coiled in a corner, with pipes leading down the outside of the structure. He had built us a farm in the sky, a place to grow, literally and figuratively. Standing up there, 30 feet off the ground, we could see for miles. The rolling golden hills, the dark green patches of oak forest, the empty dirt road leading back to a world that had forgotten us. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was on the edge of the world. I felt like I was at the center of my own. The next few weeks were a blur of work. Our first trip into town was an exercise in awkwardness and planning. We walked the 5 miles, carrying the empty backpack. At the small county office next to the post office, I paid the back taxes in cash. The woman behind the counter gave me a long, strange look, but took the money and stamped the deed with a resounding thud. It was official. The land was ours, free and clear. Then we went to the general store. Hank was behind the counter. He nodded at us, his expression still a little concerned. "You kids survived the night, I see," he said. "We did," I said, trying to sound casual. "Place needs some work, though." "I reckon," he said, leaning on the counter. "Your granddad was always hauling lumber and supplies out there. Never saw what he was building. Folks figured he was just a crazy old hermit." "He was a builder," Maya said quietly, and Hank looked at her, then at me, and seemed to see something shift in us. The lost kids from the bus stop were gone. We bought what we could carry: canned food, bread, matches, soap, work gloves, basic survival gear. As I paid, Hank looked at our haul. "You're gonna need more than that if you're planning on staying." "It's a start," I said. He grunted. "Got a delivery truck. For a small fee, I can bring heavier stuff out. Propane, lumber, whatever you need. Just give me a list." It was a simple business offer, but it felt like more. It felt like an outstretched hand. The days fell into a rhythm. Mornings were for cleaning and organizing. We swept years of dust out of the containers, wiped down every surface, and took inventory of the tools and supplies our grandfather had left. He had left us everything we needed to start: a generator, a small propane stove, lanterns, even 2 new sleeping bags still in their packaging. Afternoons were for learning. I sat at the workbench for hours, poring over the books he'd left. I read about framing walls, wiring a simple 12-volt solar system, and plumbing a sink. I'd never been a good student in school, but this was different. This wasn't abstract knowledge. This was the language of survival, the grammar of building a home. Every page I read was a conversation with the man I'd never known. Maya took over the greenhouse. She cleared the planting beds, read the books on container gardening he had left for her, and made lists of seeds we needed to buy. She had a quiet focus, a patience I lacked. While I was wrestling with a generator manual, she was gently tending to the soil, preparing a place for life to grow. One afternoon, about a month after we arrived, the letter came. It was delivered by a rural mail carrier in a dusty Jeep. It was thick and official, from the same law firm that had contacted me initially, but this time the letterhead also bore the logo of Omnicorp Developments. It was addressed to me. I read it standing there on the dirt road, the sun beating down on my neck. It was exactly what my grandfather had predicted. The letter was polite, professional, and utterly predatory. It expressed their deep interest in acquiring our rural parcel to be part of a future community development project. It mentioned the land's limited agricultural potential and lack of county services. It made a cash offer of $10,000. And then the final paragraph, the velvet glove hiding the iron fist. We understand that managing a remote property can be a significant burden, especially for a young owner. Should you be uninterested in our generous offer, please be aware that the county has strict codes regarding unpermitted structures and habitation. We would hate to see you run into any legal complications. It was a threat, plain and simple. $10,000 to a kid who started with $53 was supposed to sound like a fortune. They thought I was ignorant. They thought I was desperate. They thought I would see the money and the threat and run. They didn't know about my grandfather. They didn't know about his letters. They didn't know that this wasn't just a property to me. I walked back to the containers, the letter clutched in my hand. Maya was on the roof of the top container, silhouetted against the sky. I climbed the stairs and joined her. I handed her the letter without a word. She read it, her expression hardening. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice tight. I looked out at our land, our 4.7 acres, our tower, our home. I thought about the men in suits who had destroyed our family and now wanted to sweep away the last trace of it. I thought about my grandfather, working alone out here for years, planning and building, hoarding love and hope for us in these steel boxes. He had given us a fortress. He had given us the tools to fight back. Selling wasn't an option. It would be a betrayal of everything he had sacrificed. "What are we going to do?" I repeated her question, a slow smile spreading across my face. "We're going to build, and then we're going to fight." I took the letter from her, tore it into 4 perfect squares, and let the pieces flutter away on the wind. They were just paper. We were built of something stronger. The decision to fight changed everything. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about defiance. Every nail I hammered was a statement. Every wall we raised was a barricade. Omnicorp had made a critical mistake. They had mistaken our poverty for weakness. They didn't realize that when you've had nothing, you learn to hold on to the first real thing you're given with a grip of steel. Our first major project was the second-floor living space. Following my grandfather's blueprints, we started putting up the drywall he had left neatly stacked against one wall. It was clumsy work at first. The sheets were heavy, awkward. I mismeasured cuts, fumbled with the screw gun. But we learned. We learned to work together, Maya holding a sheet steady while I fastened it to the studs. There was a quiet satisfaction in the work, in seeing a real room take shape around us. A room that was ours. A room no one could take away. We made weekly trips to town, using Hank's delivery service for the heavy items. We bought plumbing supplies, wiring, a small water heater. Hank never asked too many questions. He'd just grunt, load up the truck and say, "See you next week." I think he knew what we were doing, and I think, in his own quiet way, he approved. The other people in town started to recognize us. A nod from a farmer at the feed store, a friendly wave from the librarian, a woman named Sarah, who let Maya use the library's computers to research solar panel efficiency. We were still outsiders, but we were becoming a familiar part of the landscape. We were the Vargas kids, the ones living out on the old hermit's land in the metal boxes. One day, Mr. Davies, the lawyer, called me. His voice was dry, professional. "Mr. Vargas, I'm calling to follow up on the correspondence from Omnicorp Developments. They contacted my office, indicating they had not received a reply to their offer." "We're not interested in their offer," I said, my voice firm. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Leo," he said, his tone shifting slightly, becoming less lawyerly and more human. "These are not people you want to ignore. They have deep pockets and a great deal of influence in that county. The code violations they mentioned, that's not an idle threat. They can make your life very difficult." "I'm aware of that," I said, "but this land is not for sale." Another pause. I could almost hear him weighing his words. "Your grandfather," he said finally. "He was a very determined man. He came to my office when he was setting up his will. He told me what he was planning. I told him it was unorthodox. I told him it was risky. He said, 'The world is risky. I'm just building my grandkids a better risk.' He made me promise to contact you on your 18th birthday, no matter what. He was convinced you'd make the right choice." Hearing this, hearing that my grandfather had confided in this man, solidified my resolve. "Then I guess I'm just trying to prove him right," I said. "Very well," Mr. Davies said, a note of something that might have been respect in his voice. "I would advise you to start documenting everything, every bit of work you do. Take pictures, keep receipts. If they push, a record of continuous improvement on the property will be your best defense. And Leo, be careful." We took his advice. We started a journal documenting our progress with photos from a cheap disposable camera. The first wall going up. The day we installed our first window, a real double-paned window we'd salvaged from a construction site dumpster and repaired. The day we got the water pump working, and clear, cold water came gushing out of the well for the first time. Maya and I just stood there, getting soaked, laughing like idiots. It felt like a miracle. As the months passed, the container tower transformed. The second floor became a home. We had 2 small, cozy bedrooms, a functional kitchen with a propane stove and a sink that drained into a gray water system for the garden, and a tiny bathroom with a composting toilet. We weren't just camping anymore, we were living. Maya's greenhouse on the 3rd floor began to flourish. She had a gift for it. Soon, we had rows of lettuce, tomatoes, beans, and herbs. The food we grew tasted better than anything I'd ever eaten. It tasted like work and sun and independence. We had more than we could eat ourselves, so one day, Maya packed a small box of fresh vegetables and we took it into town. We left it on the counter at the general store for Hank. He looked at the box, then at us. He picked up a bright red tomato, inspecting it. He nodded slowly. "Your granddad always said this land had good sun," was all he said. The next week, when we went to the store, there was a small bag of coffee beans waiting for us on the counter. "On the house," Hank grunted. It was the beginning of a quiet trade, an unspoken alliance. The second letter from Omnicorp came 6 months after the first. The tone had changed. The politeness was gone, replaced by a cold, legalistic edge. It referenced specific county codes we were allegedly violating. Unpermitted permanent structure. improper sanitation, non-compliance with residential building standards. It informed us that they had filed a formal complaint with the county planning department. A hearing was scheduled. "We urge you to reconsider our offer," the letter concluded, "as it would be the simplest way to resolve these unfortunate legal entanglements." The offer was now $15,000. Reading it felt like a punch to the gut. They were done waiting. They were coming for us. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the small kitchen table we had built, staring at the letter. The weight of it all pressed down on me. The responsibility, the fear of failing, of losing this one thing that was ours. I was just a kid who knew how to use a circular saw, but not how to fight a corporation in a courtroom. All the confidence I had built over the past few months crumbled, leaving behind the scared, doubtful boy from the group home. I must have been sitting there for hours when Maya came out of her room. She didn't turn on the light. She just sat down across from me in the dark. "He knew this would happen," she said softly. "I know," I whispered. "He warned me in the letters, but reading it is different. It makes it real." "So what did he say we should do?" she asked. I thought back to the other letters in the lockbox, the ones I hadn't read yet. I had been saving them, reading one every few weeks, like a slow conversation with my grandfather. There was one I had read just a few nights before. It was about fear. "He said that fear is just a signal," I told her, the memory of his words coming back to me. "It's your body telling you that something is important." He said that the men in suits use fear like a tool to make people feel small and powerless. He said the only way to beat them is to not play their game. Don't let them make you feel small. You stand on your land, you look them in the eye, and you tell them your story. Because their story is about money. Our story is about home, and home is stronger. Maya reached across the table and put her hand on mine. "So that's what we'll do," she said. "We'll tell them our story." Her simple, unwavering faith was the tether I needed. The panic receded. The fear was still there, but it wasn't paralyzing anymore. It was, as my grandfather had said, a signal that this fight mattered. I called Mr. Davies the next day. I told him about the hearing. "I'll be there," he said immediately. "I'll represent you, pro bono. I made a promise to your grandfather." The day of the hearing, we drove to the county seat with Hank. He insisted. "Neighbors help neighbors," he said when I tried to protest. He sat in the back of the sterile, air-conditioned hearing room while I stood at a podium next to Mr. Davies. On the other side of the room was a lawyer from Omnicorp, a slick, expensive-looking man who wouldn't meet my eye. The county commissioners listened impassively as the Omnicorp lawyer laid out his case, citing code after code, presenting our home as a dangerous, illegal blight on the landscape. He painted us as squatters, delinquents. Then it was my turn. I was terrified. My hands were shaking. But I looked at Maya, sitting in the front row, and I thought of my grandfather. I took a deep breath, and I told our story. I told them about our childhood in the system. I told them about our grandfather and his letters. I didn't talk about codes or permits. I talked about what it meant to build a home with your own two hands. I talked about the greenhouse and the well and the solar panels we were saving for. I told them we weren't just living there. We were building a future on the only piece of the world that had ever been ours. When I finished, the room was quiet. One of the commissioners, a stern-looking older woman, looked at the Omnicorp lawyer. "And what exactly is the nature of your client's interest in this property?" she asked. "We have plans for a significant development that would bring jobs and tax revenue to the county," he said smoothly. "I see," she said. "And your complaint was the first this board has heard about any issues on the Vargas property?" "Yes, We felt it was our civic duty to report these violations. She looked through the file in front of her. It's also my civic duty to note that your company has filed similar complaints against 6 other small property owners in that same area over the last 2 years, all of whom subsequently sold their land to your company for significantly below market value. The lawyer's smug expression faltered. The board deliberated for 20 minutes. When they came back, the chairwoman looked at me. "Mr. Vargas," she said, "the board recognizes that there are code irregularities with your dwelling. However, we also recognize the unique circumstances of your situation. We are issuing a provisional occupancy permit valid for 2 years. During that time, you are to work with the county planning department to bring your home up to code. We have programs to assist low-income owner-builders. A county inspector will be assigned to guide you, not to penalize you." She then looked at the Omnicorp lawyer. "Complaint dismissed." It was over. We had won. Walking out of that building, blinking in the bright sunlight, I felt 10 feet tall. We hadn't just saved our home. We had been seen. We had been heard. Hank clapped me on the shoulder, a huge grin on his face. "Told you Elias was a smart man," he said. "He knew this land was worth fighting for." That victory was a turning point. It wasn't the end of the fight, but it was the end of the beginning. The threat from Omnicorp receded. They didn't go away, but their direct attacks stopped. They knew we wouldn't be easily intimidated. The story of the hearing got around Harmony Creek. We weren't just the weird kids in the containers anymore. We were the kids who stood up to the big developer and won. People started talking to us more. The farmer who had nodded at me now stopped his truck to ask if we needed help with a new fence post. Sarah, the librarian, started a small community seed exchange and made sure Maya got first pick. We were slowly, tentatively, becoming part of the fabric of the town. Life settled into a new kind of normal. A normal defined by hard work, small victories, and the quiet rhythm of the seasons. We finished the interior of our home. We installed the solar panels and disconnected from the noisy generator. We learned how to can the vegetables from the greenhouse, lining our shelves with jars of tomatoes and beans that glowed like jewels in the afternoon light. The container tower no longer looked like an industrial accident. It looked like a home. We planted flowers at its base. Maya painted a sprawling mural of a tree on the side of the bottom container, its roots digging deep into the earth and its branches reaching for the sky. One evening, I climbed to the roof of the greenhouse to watch the sunset, something I did often. It was my favorite time of day, when the world went quiet and the sky caught fire. I thought about the word my grandfather had used in his first letter: inheritance. I used to think inheritance was about money or property, something you were given. But I was wrong. His real inheritance wasn't the land, or the containers, or the money. It was the choice he gave us. The choice to build something instead of accepting what was given. The choice to fight for it. A home isn't a place you are given. It's a place you make. You build it, and you defend it, and you fill it with love and work and hope. It's a story you write for yourself, one nail, one seed, one day at a time. Looking out over the rolling hills, I felt a profound sense of peace. The ghosts of the past were still there, but they were no longer haunting me. They were a part of the foundation. My grandfather's love was in the sturdy walls around me. My parents' mistakes were a cautionary tale that had led us here, to this sanctuary. And my sister, my warrior sister, was downstairs, probably reading a book by the light of a solar-powered lamp, safe. We had taken the wreckage of our lives and built an ark. So that's how it started. That's the beginning of our story. It wasn't easy, and the work is never truly done. But every morning when I wake up in the home we built, I am reminded that the most valuable things in this world are the ones you have to fight for. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever had to build a home out of the pieces someone else left behind, I want you to know that you are not alone. This channel is a community for people who understand that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about how you get back up and what you decide to build. Hit that subscribe button, and in the comments below, tell me about a time you had to make a choice to fight for your own future. I read every single one, because every story like ours deserves to be heard.